Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here. Today's episode is going to be a little different because it's going to be sort of like a news broadcast of sorts, because I've got a heck of a lot of things to cover, both in terms of global events, products that are coming out, and also the future of my business and of this channel. So I'm going to break up everything into little chapters once I'm finished speaking, so that if there's one particular part of the video that you care about more than others, you can just skip ahead to the correct timestamps. That'll be in the video description below and should be searchable on the little chapters bar along the video timeline. But the first thing I wanted to cover is that, a lot of my clients are American. They're from the USA that send me things to be repaired. And currently, the USA is a little crazy with the whole Trump presidency. In particular, and I won't go into global politics very much, but it does seem from an outsider perspective as an Australian that the current government over there is really trying to shake up and dismantle itself as rapidly as possible. And one thing that has happened that has affected the rest of the world globally is the whole conversation about tariffs. In particular, the tariffs against China. That has thrown China into quite a lot of upheaval in regards to their shipping system, and as a result, there's a lot of delays with products coming out of China. Not just going to the USA, but also coming to me as well. So, for example, the SX-70R PCBs that I install for clients, these are made by the SX-70R project, which is based in China. They are fabricated in China, as are basically most modern electronics these days. And as a result of the tariffs, a lot of the shippers in China have all of a sudden had to sort of halt deliveries to the US, come up with a new way to pay tariffs, and it's very, very complex. And what I'm trying to say here, it's resulted in delays across the board. So for example, I currently have quite a lot of the Sonar PCBs in stock, but I'm out of stock of the standard SX-70R PCBs. So I just wanted to first of all state that if you are waiting on one of these, because I've got about 7 cameras, maybe 8 cameras that I'm working on at the moment, which are all finished, they're just waiting for their new PCBs to be installed, there will be a slight delay while China sorts everything out in regards to the tariffs. So I do apologize if you're waiting on your camera to be refurbished. It is simply beyond my control, and despite being located in Australia, which is very far away from the USA, even I am being affected by Donald Trump's tariffs. The second thing I wanted to say, just in regards to the USA-based clients, is that none of the things that I repair for you should ever be subject to tariffs. And that's going to be for 2 reasons. The first of which is, at least at the time that I'm posting this video, Donald Trump hasn't announced any tariffs on imports from Australia. But secondly, when you send a camera from America to me, I fix it and then send it back. That is what is called a temporary export, meaning that neither myself nor you should have to pay duties on that. Because it is your camera. You are getting it refurbished, but it is yours and it's going back to its country of origin. And when I return cameras for clients on the customs form, I will put that it is a returned good. So when you basically, for those that aren't aware, when you ship something overseas, you have to tick a little box saying, does your item have value? And of course, I like to insure my packages, so I will say that yes, this SX-70 does have a value. And then the next question will be, well, what's the reason for its value? Now, a returned good basically should be in a category that is then exempt from any kind of import fees or tariffs, at least to a certain value. Because basically it is not something that you are purchasing, it is something that is being returned home to you, and the value that I've put on the insurance is not to reflect the sale price, but basically to say that yes, this is a valuable item and it was, being sent off for repairs. So it shouldn't affect any of my USA-based clients. Obviously, if things change, then I will let you know, of course. But I've been selling refurbished cameras and refurbishing cameras for clients since the start of the year, and it hasn't been a problem. I've had a few people reach out and ask, so I just wanted to broach that as a subject. Just for anyone that might be in the USA wondering if my business will be affected, in terms of me sending it back to you, it should all be fine. The next thing I wanted to touch on is somewhat of a problem, but it's like a good problem to have. And I'd like to preface this by saying, at no way at all am I complaining, because this is literally what I've wanted. But I am getting ridiculously busy. And it's going to mean that I have to change and streamline the way that I operate things. Basically, because of the rise of this YouTube video and the rise in demand for, independent sole technicians that are going to do a good job at refurbishing your camera and be very honest and very transparent, the demand for my services has skyrocketed to an all-time high. As I've alluded to throughout my videos last year, this is my full-time job now. All I do is refurbish classic Polaroid cameras, in particular the SX-70, but I do other models as well, as you've probably seen from the channel. But the SX-70 and folding SLR series is far and away the most popular one. I'm fully involved in terms of the SX-70R project, so the manual control PCBs with Bluetooth functionality and remote control. I've become heavily involved with that project. I invented the calibration method for them. I helped redesign the dongle to take rechargeable batteries. I came up with the PolaVolt solution to basically invent like a sustainable open source I-type battery solution. And as a result of that, like I said, I've just become very, very busy to the point where I now have like a waiting list that I'm booked out a few weeks in advance, which is pretty normal. I mean, most repair places end up getting quite busy, but it's gotten to the stage where, I'm a one-man operation, and kind of, I think my entire sort of shtick is that I am a one-man operation. And, if you chat to me online, if you message me on Instagram or leave a comment here, it's me that responds. I don't have an email team. I don't have a social media team. When I make these videos, it's me who's making them. It's me who's doing the repairs. I don't have any other employees or anything like that. And what that means is there's sort of a limit to how busy I can become before it starts to become very stressful and basically cause burnout. And, when I started this business, when I started ramping up things to go full time, I basically wanted to make sure that I could continue a YouTube channel so that I could educate people. I wanted to offer the best quality repairs that's out there in terms of, people that can service an SX-70. And most importantly, I wanted to do it in a way that was sustainable so that I could work from home, basically enjoy what I do, and, everyone benefits as a result of that. And at the moment, it's getting to the stage where if I let things progress any further, it will become stressful to the point where, I may suddenly stop enjoying what it is that I'm doing. And so that means I'm going to need to make a few changes in terms of how I run my business. Now, there are obviously lots of different ways in which I could do that. I could raise my prices, which would probably result in less people sending me stuff, so I'd be less busy. I don't really want to do that, right? I don't want to have to inflate my prices to be necessarily above everyone else. Another thing I could do is get an employee. Again, I just don't want to. I am of the belief that, when it's your own business, no one is going to work as hard or as well as you, and that's just a universal truth. It doesn't matter. I could hire someone who is just as capable as me. They're never going to quite do the same level of care that I put into this, because my entire brand is that this is me. I literally put my face on, and at least my hands, on this channel. And I really pride myself in the work that I do, and I always try and do my best. So I don't necessarily want to then have to add the extra complicated parts of, hiring another member of staff, and it all starts to get too messy. And the other thing is I don't believe that a business like that is necessarily particularly scalable. It's just simply much easier for me to keep things as a one-man band, so to speak. So what I believe I'm going to do, and I've been thinking about this, and I'm going to go through my rationale about why I'm deciding to go forwards with this, but basically from this point forwards, and obviously if at this stage you've already sent me something and I've agreed to repair it, then that's fine, you're exempt from this. But basically, going forwards, I'm only going to be focusing on the new SX-70R PCBs. Meaning that when I overhaul a camera, it's going to be an overhaul plus the new PCB installed, and that's going to be one capped rate price, you know, unless you need some kind of critical spare part. That's going to be my new fee, so I'll obviously raise the price to reflect the fact that all cameras are now going to come with the new PCB. But that is basically what I'll be doing from this point forwards. The reason that I've made that decision, and it's not a decision that I've made lightly, but it's multifactorial. The first being that it's what a lot of my clients, and I would say a majority of my clients, come to me for anyway, is to have the PCB upgrade, additionally followed by the I-type battery mod. And the reason for that is simply that you just get a friggin' amazing camera. As far as I'm concerned, this is the best SX-70 that money can buy. The new PCB has the widest range of shutter speeds. It's accessible via phone app. You can get remote control dongles that you know can fire the shutter remotely. You can do so much kind of stuff. The new PCBs are more reliable because they're brand new. They're also based on digital circuitry that measures light, so you're not having to rely on old analog circuitry where, you know, crusty electric eyes and drifting capacitor values and that kind of stuff can affect things. And if the boards are more reliable, it means that I have to sit through less warranty claims. You know, not that it's very common at all, but the extra reliability, basically what I find is that when I do SX-70R conversions, I never have to go through any sort of like it's very rare that I have to go through troubleshooting or warranty claims. Whereas when I do more standard modifications, I tend to get more questions asked. You know, for example, one of the things is people pressing the shutter button too fast. On a classic SX-70, and I've done videos about this before, if you stab the shutter button very quickly, the SX-70 can lock up, and that's because that's how the original SX-70 Model 1 and Model 2 shutters worked. That's not a problem on the new PCBs. It's going to work regardless of how quickly you use the shutter button. So, you know, there's no such thing as mid-cycle shutdown. So that's one, you know, that's just one example of an area where I don't have to do, you know, problem solving with a client after the fact. So it cuts a lot of my overhead right down. Now, it's obviously more involved to replace the entire circuit board than it is to simply just swap out a capacitor and tune a solenoid, but it is a type of job that's more streamlined, right? If I'm basically doing the same thing to every single client's camera and I'm doing it in a really high quality, it makes my job easier. Another reason that I've decided to go down this route is just over the last few months, I don't know if this is because I've developed a reputation as being very good, or if good quality SX-70s are getting harder to find. I don't really know what the reason is, or whether it's just a complete coincidence, but over the last few months, I had a lot of you guys send me really fucked up cameras. Like, really bad condition. Oxidized, fungus, you name it. And look at just how crusty some of the electric eyes have been on the cameras that I've received. Now, it is possible to still refurb and 600 mod these, but 600 conversion on a camera that is this far gone starts to become a really dark art. You know, we're talking about having to replace infrared filters, we're talking about swapping out capacitor values and tuning solenoids, and doing so in a way that isn't always 100%, what's the word that I'm looking for here? In a way that's predictable, right? Old PCBs, because they're 50 years old and analog circuits, can be a little bit unpredictable in just what you need to do to 600 modify them. And I've had a few clients recently where I've just had a really hard time, and it's taken me a really long time to refurbish what otherwise should have been a pretty simple job. And so if I was, installing one of the new PCBs, although it would have been extra work, at least it's a set amount of work that I go, right, that is how long this job is going to take me. And then I can basically plan for it a lot better. So going forwards, as I said, basically all of my cameras will be pretty much a flat rate. So you'll get an overhaul plus the new PCB installed. Then optional extras will include the PolaVolt, a dongle if you want one, and I'm going to be covering that in just a second. And then any other mods on top of that, whether it be, leather, etc., shutter button colors, all of that kind of stuff, which you can chat to me about. That brings me onto the subject of the dongle. These things are quite hard to produce. It's far and away been one of the biggest causes of delays. Last year there was a huge delay in production in terms of sourcing the parts and getting all the components together, and there was about 3 months where we just couldn't get any dongles. I know of clients still that are waiting on dongles that they ordered direct from the website months and months ago. There's been a lot of delays. As a result of those delays coming from the production side of things, Yongmin is in the stages of redesigning the dongle, and I'm providing input on how to do that. Basically, the dongle is going to go through some revisions that make the construction of it a lot simpler and easier to replicate. And as a result, I should be able to stock them more readily and be able to sell them alongside cameras for those that want them. Because at the moment, I get people say, hey, can I get the dongle so that I don't just have to use my phone app? Because obviously with the SX-70R PCB being Bluetooth controlled, you can use a phone app if you want to use the manual speeds, but some clients really like the dongle. And I've just had to say, look, I just don't have any. There's a shortage of them. So we are in the process of redesigning the dongle to avoid those shortages. One of the things that is going to change in terms of the dongle design in the future is the built-in light meter will be being deleted. Now, the reason for that is a fewfold. The first is it's going to drastically simplify production and mean that we can implement simpler code into the actual chips that control all the Bluetooth functionality. But in addition to that, we found that not a lot of people actually use the built-in meter anyway. And the way that the built-in meter is calibrated is basically the same as the electric eye on the new PCB. So they work using the same formula. And so what that means is if you were using the built-in dongle to take like an average reading of the scene and you were dialing it in manually, you were basically getting what the automatic mode was going to give you anyway. Like unless you were physically moving over somewhere and taking like a spot reading, if you were just using it attached to the camera, taking an average reading of the scene, and then dialing it in manually, you were basically just using the automatic mode that the actual PCB would have done, which I think is just like a little bit pointless. It's basically auto with extra steps. Most of my clients ended up using their own handheld meters or spot meters because most professional photographers that want that extra functionality already have a light meter, if that makes sense. And so what I would find is probably about 75% of people that want the new SX-70R PCB, the main thing that they are concerned about is just having a really accurate automatic mode and extra reliability. And honestly, I think that's the best selling feature of the SX-70R PCB. The other stuff is a bonus, right? Like the manual control and the remote shutter speed and that kind of, the remote shutter settings, all of that is like an awesome bonus. The main selling point, I think, and what sells these on their own is the fact that these are just so accurate on automatic mode. So I find that really like fine art photographers and people that do want the extra control usually already have cameras or light meters or a studio strobe setup that's built in to accommodate that. And so as a result, just to simplify production a lot, we will be deleting the light meter from the dongle. Now, some might be unhappy with that. I personally don't think it's going to really affect anyone. if it ends up being that, you know, the demand is great, maybe we'll end up having 2 different types of dongles, but I think going forwards we're just going to be removing the light meter, just to simplify things and ensure that we can always have production ready. The other thing that I wanted to show you, and I've got a little example prototype of it here, is that going forwards, the dongles will have half-stop shutter controls. So it used to go, you know, 8,000, 4,000, 2,000. There are now half stops to give you even greater control over the shutter on manual mode. This is something that you guys have been asking for a while, and I managed to convince the guy that does the coding for the dongles to implement that. I'm also trying to implement an EV-based reading as well, because at the moment, if you have the SX-70R dongle, you can access, shutter speed. If you press the wheel in, it tells you the effective aperture. I'm also going to try and get them to put in the EV value as well, so that you get a reading of aperture, the effective shutter speed, or just a straight up EV value, depending on what you prefer to measure. I personally think the EV is just a much simpler way of thinking about how the SX-70 shutter works anyway, and it makes metering a lot more simple for the purposes of the SX-70R. I think it's just going to be a much better option. So yeah, those changes will be coming in terms of the dongle, so stay tuned for that. Another thing I wanted to cover in today's news was a new type of film counter. Far and away, one of the most common side things that I get asked is, can we change the SX-70 so that instead of counting down from 10 shots as the original counter, which I have in my hand here, which it starts at, can we get it to start counting from 8 shots? The answer to that, like most things in instant photography, is way more complicated than it might appear on the surface. And there are dodgy ways of doing it by putting a sticker that goes over the old numbers. Those stickers tend to peel off from my experience, so that's not something that I offer, because when I offer solutions to Polaroid's cameras and upgrading them and that kind of stuff, I like to do proper solutions, not half-baked ones. And so I was chatting to regular contributor to the Polaroid community, Nick Kandari from Canada. He has come up with other novel SX-70 solutions in the past. He was the one that came up with the method of 600 converting Fairchild shutters. So I've shouted him out on this channel before. Anyway, he took up the personal challenge and basically invented this, which is an LED film counter that starts at 8 and counts down. So it uses a 9-segment display. 9-segment? Is that how many displays? Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A 7-segment display. Kind of like an alarm clock. And basically will count down. When film is not inserted, it says E for empty. And when you insert a pack of film, it is going to say D for dark slide. Now, this is currently a prototype. A production version may be coming in the future. When that happens, I will do a video on it. In fact, I've wanted to do a video on 8-shot counters for a very long period of time, but I've been putting it off just in case this thing became a reality and not a dream. It is not an easy thing to install. To install it involves stripping the camera down to its chassis, desoldering the original counter, removing it. You have to custom make like little contact terminals and do a whole bunch of wiring into the ribbon cables. In fact, when Nick invented this, he never intended on it to be ever used with the PolaVolt lithium-ion battery solution. And I actually spent basically an entire day nutting out the wiring, getting very frustrated because it's not a product that ever existed, but I have figured out a way to wire it up to the PolaVolt so that, like everything else, it just turns off when the camera is collapsed and turns on when the camera is erect and lets you manually eject the dark slide and that kind of stuff. So if this makes it into production, this will be an additional accessory that you could have installed after the new PCB, after the PolaVolt. This will be an extra thing to add on top of it. But as I said, this is not something that is currently in production. It is something that I'm showing off because a few videos are making it their way around the internet at the moment. You guys may have seen this on the SX-70 Facebook forum. Nick has posted about it as well, and I wanted to just answer those questions and say, yes, I am aware of it. In fact, I think I was the inspiration for it. I'll have to check with Nick on that, but we had many, many discussions over many months. He even sent me like a 3D printed version of the original counter wheel with different numbers on it, which I refused to use because I was like, it looks like garbage. But this looks really, really cool. You have to like file the hole on the body to basically enlarge the little counter hole, but it is a really cool novel solution. I wanted to announce that in today's news video, basically to let you guys know it might be coming. Do not ask me when. And all I'll say is it won't be a cheap thing to add, but for those that absolutely insist on having it, it is hopefully something that I'll be able to add in the future. If you absolutely want the world's best folding SLR camera. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was the PolaVolt Portable. I last posted on this many months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, I think. Look, time flies, guys. I am happy to say that we are making progress in regards to prototypes. The 2 green ones you see here were prototypes. These ones are sort of like a beta release, if you will. This is pretty much how the finished product, if it ever becomes a product, will look. There are only a few things that I've got to nut out here. The first being logistics. If this is going to be something that I sell on the side, I'm going to need to find a place that I can, buy shipping boxes. I'm going to need to, get the packaging sorted out for them and that kind of stuff. And I'm going to need to set aside time in which to build them in batches, because these aren't something that's being made en masse in China. The parts might come from China, but I am assembling each of them by hand. Now, some might say, well, isn't that going to add additional cost and that kind of stuff? Yeah, well, that's kind of the point. Like, I'm not a mass-produced resell from China guy. I am a, if you buy something from me, this is me making it by hand kind of guy. It means that I can guarantee the functionality of each one because, well, I built it, and that should hopefully mean that none of these ever get returned. But this is all stuff that I have to figure out. The last thing that I really need to figure out is if there is any risk of these posing any kind of danger. Now, when I say danger, I'm talking about, short circuits, fried electronics, or God forbid, the possibility of fire, which is always something to worry about when you're dealing with lithium-ion batteries. Now, fortunately, hard cell lithium-ion batteries are on the safer side of things. And having used them in my PolaVolt solution for many, many months now, I can say that, when I convert a camera to take the PolaVolt battery mod, basically just due to the nature of its design, this thing is very safe to use. It integrates into the camera's electronics, basically meaning that when the camera is erect, it's powered on, and when the camera is collapsed, it's switched off. You cannot... because I removed the original battery terminals on the classic PolaVolt, there's no way to basically, short circuit or send voltage into the wrong side of the DC-DC converter, because there are no more battery terminals in which you can short out. Everything is insulated, everything is pretty much weatherproof because the entire battery cover covers everything. It is very foolproof. The classic PolaVolt, the reason that I think it's such a good battery solution is because of the way that it is wired into the camera, which makes it highly integrated. It means, you can't leave it sitting there draining the battery by accident. All you got to do is store the camera like it says to do in the manual, and you're covered. It can't drain on its own. It can't discharge on its own. It can't short circuit because the way that it's wired in prevents all that kind of stuff from happening. On a portable version, which uses pogo pins, that isn't the case. Now, I figured out a way to cover up any exposed terminals at the bottom. Basically, I've been able to source these nice rubber strips, which add a nice amount of grippiness. It is also possible to put JB weld over the terminals, and so likely I'll use some kind of, either brush on electrical tape plus the rubber feet just to double insulate things. And that means that the only way of short-circuiting these particular battery adapter backs would be from the top. And this is what I've still got to figure out is that going to pose any kind of major risk? Now, the way that I see it is, provided that I was insulating everything, you would really have to go out of your way to do harm with one of these. But I think what's important to remember when running a business is that not every customer that you're going to have is intelligent. In fact, some people are morons. And I need to factor that in. I need to figure out, if someone is a moron when using this battery adapter, can they harm themselves or accidentally burn their house down? And I'm pretty sure that the answer is no, but you can be sure as hell that I want to guarantee that before I start selling these things as any kind of mass-produced product. The entire purpose of the PolaVolt Portable is to be a very, very simple and effective I-type battery solution. And from a power delivery perspective, that is absolutely the case. It uses, after all, the same 10440 lithium-ion cells as my PolaVolt does, only in a portable version that you can remove from the camera. Now, this does mean that it needs a tripod socket, so it will only work on Alpha and Sonar model cameras, and the SLR680 if you use the AAA-sized battery version. But, this is... Where did my train of thought just go? Now, by the very nature of it being portable and being able to be removed from the camera and having at least two terminals that must be exposed, a lot of the safety features, so to speak, and when I say safety features, I mean like just the redundancy in design and the way that the classic PolaVolt is wired, basically means that you don't have to worry about anything with this. Like, this can't cause any problems unless you were to, break it or damage it, or you would have to do something to this to cause problems. With this, not so much, because things are exposed, and that's the double-edged sword. Yes, you get something that's removable, but now we've got to take things into consideration. And one solution, when it comes to the batteries, I've sort of got two versions of the PolaVolt Portable that I've made. The first uses rechargeable lithium-ion 9 volts. Now these are great because they have their own short circuit protection basically built in to the battery cell itself. So if I just clip this in here, basically if anything shorts out the positive and negative here, the battery itself will switch itself off. It'll just power down. So that's quite novel. That's a built-in safety feature that's in the battery itself. For this version that uses the 10440 cells, well, that kind of safety feature doesn't exist. And if you short those out, these battery terminals inside here will become red hot and start to melt the plastic. Now, generally, I find that if that happens, a reaction happens to the metal where the spring actually shrinks. Because I have accidentally done this before when I was when I just had a battery holder on my bench, and it thus cuts the circuit. So it doesn't start a fire or anything, but it does destroy the battery adapter. The buck converter does appear to have some kind of short circuit protection built in as well, although it's not particularly advertised as such. Basically, if I take a lead and short out positive and negative, as far as I'm aware, the little chip picks up on that and basically causes the voltage to drop to about 0. And you can actually leave that plugged in and it doesn't do anything. So I've tested that pretty significantly. In fact, maybe we can just leave it hooked up. And like I said, if you were to do something very, very silly, like very, very silly, and short circuit this thing, see, it just switches off. So I am firmly of the belief that like this isn't getting hot or anything like that at all. Like, yeah, at least this alligator clip seems fine. So whilst I think that the risk of damage is basically zero, I really want to ensure that it is before I start selling them. And, you know, some of your feedback is probably welcome below. The only other thing that I could add is, you know, some kind of short circuit protection to the actual, you know, circuit board itself, but that starts to complicate the design and it'll start to add to the cost. So I don't really want to do that per se. So I'm still not sure if you guys will ever see these things properly make it into production, but I do have a few, like I said, sort of beta versions that I have finished that are a proof of concept. The other thing that I need to figure out is where to get a supply of appropriately sized screws to fit these things to the base of the cameras. So yeah, there's still a lot to figure out. I figured I would just give you a bit of an update on where that project's going. Because like I said, with any kind of battery power, you know, you want to make sure that things are going to be able to be used safely. And like I said, one of the big advantages to the classic PolaVolt is the way that it's wired in. You can never short circuit anything. You can never accidentally damage anything. The only way that you could ever drain the batteries completely, you know, below 3 volts would be if you left the thing open for days at a time. And you shouldn't do that anyway, because, well, the manual tells you to store the SX-70 collapsed. So, yeah. Anyway, I think I'm going to leave it for there. I would love to know your thoughts on everything that I've spoken about in the comments below. And I just wanted to thank you guys for basically making all of this possible. Like I said, if it wasn't for my viewers and my loyal clients, I wouldn't have a career. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys again for making this possible. And I will see you in the future for lots more exciting stuff.